You probably didn't learn this in school. While the world was consumed with the chaos of World War II, while headlines were plastered with D-Day, Iwo Jima, and Churchill's cigars, there was a war being fought not just against Hitler's U-boats, but against something a little closer to home. Something quieter, more insidious. The myth that black Americans couldn't handle technical, high-stakes military roles. And into that storm sailed a little ship with a crew that nobody expected to succeed. The USS PC-1264, a modest submarine chaser, crewed almost entirely by black sailors.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
A wartime experiment one the US Navy expected to fail. But here's the twist, it didn't fail. It dominated. This wasn't just a footnote in naval history. This was a turning point. Because what those 160 black sailors did on the Atlantic wasn't just brave, it was revolutionary. They didn't just hunt German U-boats. They torpedoed the Navy's own racist assumptions, with receipts. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1940s. The US Navy is still deeply segregated. Black men are allowed to enlist, sure, but only in limited roles. Cook, steward, porter. The kind of jobs that keep things running behind the scenes but never get the glory. Definitely not anything that involves radars, sonar systems, or firing depth charges. The official line. Black sailors lacked the technical ability and discipline for combat or engineering roles. But as the war intensified, the hypocrisy got harder to ignore. The country needed manpower, skilled sailors, and back home, voices especially from civil rights leaders were getting louder. If black Americans could be drafted, taxed, and die for their country, why were they being denied the chance to serve equally? So the Navy launched an experiment, and into that experiment walked the crew of PC-1264. From day one, it wasn't easy. The men trained at a separate facility in New York, with fewer resources and under the ever-watchful eyes of skeptical commanders. Most of the white officers assigned to the ship wanted nothing to do with it. Many refused the post altogether, because being the captain of a black ship, that was seen as a career dead end. But then came Lieutenant Eric S. Purdon, a white officer who didn't see the assignment as a punishment but as an opportunity. He was strict, demanding, and he treated his crew like sailors, not tokens. Under his leadership, the crew trained harder than anyone expected. Sonar, gunnery, diesel engines, night operations, anti-sub tactics. Every man was pushed to the limit. And guess what? They rose to meet it. Their sonar performance was particularly legendary. Purdon himself became known for tracking and engaging U-boats with uncanny accuracy. And his black operators. They developed a near-psychic ability to detect enemy submarines before most of the fleet even realized they were there. While other vessels missed threats, PC-1264 zeroed in with laser focus. Time and again, they located periscopes, tracked hull signatures, and executed textbook countermeasures. These weren't just good results, they were outperforming other ships. Period. And yet, the discrimination never stopped. PC-1264 wasn't always allowed to dock at certain ports. In southern harbors, sailors were denied shore leave. In one instance, they were refused entry to a naval facility and forced to anchor offshore, eating canned rations while other white crews went ashore for steak dinners. There's one story that hits especially hard. When the ship pulled into Miami for repairs, the men were told they couldn't use the naval barracks. Why? Because of local customs. So they slept on the ship in sweltering heat, with limited water, all while docked in their own country, in uniform, during a world war. Let that sink in. Fighting Nazis overseas, facing segregation at home. And still they didn't back down. Not once. They kept showing up, kept performing. And when it came time to escort merchant convoys across the Atlantic, one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire war, they did so with relentless professionalism. U-boat threats, countered. Merchant ships, protected. Crew morale, high. Meanwhile, Navy brass was awkwardly silent. They couldn't deny the ship's success. The logs spoke for themselves. High mission readiness, zero operational breakdowns, clean sonar hits, tactical efficiency. All while being held to a higher standard, facing bigger hurdles, and getting less support. But still, official recognition lagged. Medals were rare. Public mentions, almost non-existent. Why? Because admitting the ship's excellence meant admitting the system was wrong. That segregation was never about capability, it was about fear, about preserving power. But history has a funny way of remembering what people try to forget. By the end of the war, PC-1264 had become a quiet legend. Not because it sank a dozen enemy subs or captured headlines, but because it proved, definitively, that black sailors could do everything the Navy said they couldn't, and more. Their performance was so unimpeachable that it became part of the case study that ultimately helped President Truman sign Executive Order 9981 in 1948, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. That order didn't come out of nowhere. It came from stories like this. From ships like PC-1264. From sailors who refused to fail because failure would have been fuel for every racist stereotype they were trying to kill. Even after the war, the men of PC-1264 didn't get the hero's welcome they deserved. Many returned to civilian life to face the same old segregation, the same old obstacles. But they carried something that couldn't be taken away, a legacy of skill, courage, and quiet rebellion. They weren't just sailors. They were disruptors, trailblazers, proof that excellence can thrive in even the most hostile systems if given a sliver of a chance. And let's be real, they didn't just survive Hitler's Atlantic, they owned it. So the next time you hear about the Battle of the Atlantic, or sonar operations, or submarine chasers, remember the PC-1264. Remember the 160 black sailors who weren't supposed to succeed but became nightmares to German U-boats and an inconvenient truth to American racism. They didn't set out to make history. They just refused to be erased. And in doing so, they didn't just change the Navy. They changed what America thought it knew about who gets to fight, who gets to lead, and who gets to win. So what do you think? Did the Navy really expect this crew to fail? Or did they just hope it wouldn't work, so they wouldn't have to change? Leave a comment with your take, and if you want more untold stories of rebellion, excellence, and resistance in the unlikeless places, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes the people who were never meant to win are the ones who rewrite the rules. Because this story, it doesn't end when the war does. The tale of the USS PC-1264 isn't just about what happened on the open sea. It's about what happened after, what didn't happen, and what should have. Because after sailing through U-boat-infested waters, after operating sonar gear with mind-bending precision, after keeping convoy ships alive while dodging depth charges, after all that, most of the 160 black sailors aboard PC-1264 returned home to a country that still wouldn't let them sit at the front of the bus. Think about that. You serve your country in uniform. You prove your worth 100 times over. You protect the economy, the supply lines, the nation itself. And when you come home, you can't buy a house in a white neighborhood. You can't vote without being harassed. You can't get promoted in the civilian workforce because people still think you're only good for the boiler room. It's like winning a war and then losing your own identity. The war may have ended in 1945, but the battle for dignity, that was just getting started. And PC-1264's crew carried that burden like professionals, even after they hung up their uniforms. Some became educators. Some fought for civil rights. A few stayed in the Navy, breaking barriers from the inside. But many more were quietly buried under the weight of a system that didn't know what to do with black excellence. Because that's the uncomfortable truth here. It's not just about how racism limits opportunity. It's about how, even after success, the system often refuses to adjust the story. The official version of World War II. It didn't include ships like PC-1264 for a long time. It celebrated heroism in Normandy, in the Pacific, in the skies over Europe, but rarely in the sonars of segregated sub-chasers. And certainly not when that heroism came from black sailors who weren't even supposed to be there in the first place. Let's call it what it is, selective memory. You see, America loves a victory. It loves an underdog, too. But it gets real uncomfortable when the underdog is black, and the victory requires rewriting everything people were taught to believe about race, merit, and power. So for decades, PC-1264 was left in the margins. You wouldn't find it in school textbooks. You wouldn't see it in naval documentaries. There weren't statues. There weren't commemorations. It was a chapter that got buried until veterans and historians started digging it back up. And when they did, oh, the receipts came out. Sonar logs, mission reports, training records, first-hand accounts. It became undeniable that the crew wasn't just competent, they were exceptional. Not average, exceptional. They didn't just match their white counterparts, they often beat them at their own game. They hunted German submarines with such deadly skill that even other Navy officers, white ones, quietly admitted, yeah, they're good. Let's talk about that for a second. The reason the Navy originally resisted giving black sailors technical roles wasn't because of any data or real-world evidence. It was based purely on stereotypes. that black men weren't smart enough, weren't disciplined enough, couldn't handle pressure, wouldn't follow orders. It was racism dressed up as military policy. And what destroyed that idea? Not protests, not slogans, not even legislation. Performance. Clear, undeniable, tactical excellence under extreme conditions. PC-1264 became a floating rebuttal to every racist assumption baked into the military-industrial complex. And they did it with no margin for error. Because let's be real, if they had failed, if they'd made one mistake, the headlines would have read, "See, told you they couldn't do it." They had to be twice as good to be half as respected. Sound familiar? But they were twice as good. And they still got buried. So when people say, well, that's just how things were back then, let's push back on that. Because how things were isn't a valid excuse for erasing success. Especially when that success helped change the entire structure of the US military. Let's not forget, PC-1264 was one of the sparks that led to the end of segregation in the armed forces. The proof of performance was so overwhelming that Truman couldn't ignore it. He signed Executive Order 9981 just 3 years later, and from that moment on, the military could no longer legally segregate its forces. That order didn't come out of political kindness. It came out of necessity, out of evidence, out of the hard data and human effort supplied by the very people the Navy once refused to trust. So yes, this tiny submarine chaser with a black crew helped break the spine of military segregation. But here's what makes it even more impressive. They did it without institutional support, without parades, without special treatment. In fact, they succeeded despite every barrier put in their way. They didn't wait for permission to be excellent. They just were. And if that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what will. Now, let's get personal for a minute. Imagine being one of those sailors. You're 19, maybe 20. You've never been outside your home state. You enlist thinking you'll scrub decks or cook food. Instead, you get handed sonar equipment and told, figure it out. And the world expects you to fail. Your officers are skeptical. Your country is silent. And your success depends not just on your skill, but on your ability to prove everyone wrong. Every mission is a test. Every docking is a confrontation with racism. Every success is minimized. Every mistake could be weaponized against your entire race. And you still get up every morning, strap on your gear, and do your job flawlessly. That's not just patriotism. That's power. That's resilience in its purest form. That's what makes the legacy of USS PC-1264 so powerful today. Because it's not just history. It's a blueprint. It shows what happens when people are finally given a sliver of opportunity and the tools to rise. It shows how brilliance can come from the most overlooked places. It shows how institutions built on exclusion can be dismantled not by force, but by irrefutable excellence. And maybe, just maybe, that's why this story was kept quiet for so long. Because it forces people to ask hard questions about who we include, who we trust, who we believe in, and what kind of greatness we've already lost to bias, to fear, and to systems that refuse to see beyond the surface. But not anymore. Now, the story's out. The logs are open. The sonar echoes still ring. USS PC-1264 was never supposed to be a symbol, but it became one. A symbol of what happens when you bet against the system and win. So let's not wait for anniversaries to celebrate it. Let's talk about it. Share it. Learn from it. Let's tell the story not just because it's true, but because it still matters. Because every time we forget stories like this, we risk repeating the silence. And if there's one thing we can learn from 160 black sailors who defied an empire, it's this. You don't need to be expected to make history. You just need the chance. And when that chance comes, don't knock. Break the door down. So what's your take? Did you know about PC-1264 before this? Should we be teaching this in schools? Should the Navy be doing more to honor their legacy? Let us know in the comments. Hit subscribe for more deep dives into the stories they didn't want you to know, and don't forget. Sometimes, the most powerful weapons aren't missiles or torpedoes. Sometimes, it's the quiet, relentless force of people doing what they were told they couldn't. And winning. Because this story, it deserves your full attention, not just as a feel-good historical moment, but as a mirror one we still have to look into. Because USS PC-1264 didn't just teach us about sonar or U-boat tactics. It taught us what happens when you give people the bare minimum chance, and they turn it into a legacy. Let's rewind one last time. Picture the Atlantic during World War II. Cold, brutal, U-boats everywhere, sinking supply ships like it's a game. Civilians are dying. Food, weapons, fuel, all of it at risk. And you've got a tiny ship with a crew the Navy never really believed in, tasked with guarding those convoys. You know what that is, pressure. Not just the pressure of war, but the pressure of expectation or the lack of it. The men on PC-126 weren't just fighting Nazis. They were fighting the weight of a system that had already written them off. Every depth charge they dropped wasn't just aimed at enemy submarines. It was a hit against decades of lies. Lies that said black sailors couldn't handle responsibility. Lies that said they weren't mentally fit for technology. Lies that said, we'll give you this ship, but we already know how it ends. But the Navy didn't know how it would end. Not even close. Because PC-126 went from experiment to operational success faster than anyone expected. Their sonar operation stats, through the roof. Their readiness levels, unmatched. Their technical upkeep, precise. They had fewer maintenance issues than ships with fully white crews and better resources. And here's the kicker, their performance wasn't even supposed to be that visible. The Navy deliberately downplayed their success, tried to make sure no one paid too much attention. You can practically hear the panic in the back rooms. What happens if they're good? Like, really good, spoiler. They were. And what happens when the thing you built to fail wins? If you are the US Navy in the 1940s, you had two options. Own up to it, admit you were wrong, and open the door to integration. Or sweep it under the rug and pretend it was just a fluke. So what did they do? They stalled. Recognition came slowly. Public credit, barely whispered. These men who'd served with distinction returned to a country that was in no rush to thank them. Their mission had ended. The war was over. And yet the battle for acknowledgement had just begun. Let's not sugarcoat this. Racism didn't dissolve when the uniforms came off. For many of these men, the post-war years were filled with frustration, contradiction, and heartbreak. Imagine coming home from combat to find out you're still not allowed to buy a home in certain neighborhoods because of redlining. Imagine walking into a job interview, resume full of military tech experience and being told you're not the right fit. Imagine knowing you operated sonar under fire, but your neighbors still clutch their purse when you walk by. Yeah, that kind of welcome home. And yet they endured. They built lives, families. They passed down stories to their children, even if the history books forgot them. Because the truth has a way of surviving. Even when it's not in museums. Even when it's not in textbooks. Even when the system tries to erase it. Let's talk about legacy. Still with me? Good. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did this story surprise you? Move you? Make you angry? All three, hit that subscribe button for more stories that were almost lost to time. And remember, the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to tell it. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.